invented, you would be tied over a bamboo shoot and the plant would grow through your body within days. After World War II, stories spread that Japanese soldiers used it on Allied prisoners of war. The Japanese were seen as naturally sadistic and less than human, but when the war ended, prison records never documented using bamboo. More than 300,000 prisoners of war were beaten and starved, and bamboo torture was never mentioned. The torture method that everyone knows about seemingly never happened. The story first came up in the 1820s when a British traveler wrote about it in Sri Lanka. By World War II, it became wartime propaganda to make the enemy seem more brutal, as if the torture that we do know about wouldn't do the same thing, which is pretty insane. Most people don't know this, but oranges were never supposed to be orange. The skin actually has more vitamin C than the fruit. Oranges evolved in the warm tropics of Southeast Asia. In that climate, ripe oranges actually stay green because chlorophyll acts as a natural sunscreen against the constant heat. But in the 15th century, Portuguese traders brought oranges from tropical Asia to cold Mediterranean Europe. When temperatures dropped in the winter, the cold broke down the chlorophyll and revealed the orange pigments underneath. Europeans had never seen a green orange, so they assumed that orange was what ripe looked like. That's why the industry gases orange fields with ethylene to break down the. If you were stranded on an island, but if the only crops that would save you would actually poison you. Sea moss is a red algae that grows on ocean rocks. For more than 100 years, it kept thousands alive when other crops failed by absorbing minerals from seawater, but it can't tell the difference between minerals and toxins. So when humans started dumping things like heavy metals and radioactive isotopes into coastal waters, the same mechanism that made it a survival crop can now make it extremely dangerous. More than 100 million people consume sea moss products every year, but sellers aren't required to test it for contamination. That's why independent scientists keep finding things like arsenic and lead in products sold as superfoods. And it wasn't until the 1980s when it started being farmed in mostly clean water. So you spent your life protecting the same creatures that poison you. The most seen crops that you were never supposed to eat is the Brussels sprout. Brussels sprouts evolved to be extremely bitter so that they could avoid being eaten. Almost every normal-sized human has a gene called the TAS2R38, but only about half the population has the version that makes you extremely sensitive to bitter flavors. So most of you normal people can't comfortably eat Brussels sprouts. That means half of all the kids being forced to eat Brussels sprouts are eating something genetically designed to repel them, but schools and parents kept forcing their kids to eat it. It wasn't until the 1990s that Dutch breeders reduced the bitterness so that more people could actually eat it. An entire generation forced to eat something that their genes told them to reject. And by the time they fixed it, those kids were already adults, which is pretty insane. If your entire food system collapsed in the next 24 hours, the first fruit tree you grow is the tree tomato. The tree tomato is one of the only fruit trees that doesn't go dormant. It keeps producing fruit while everything else stops. That's why ancient humans relied on it as a year-round crop. It originated in the high altitude of the Andes, where short growing seasons forced it to produce constantly. But when the Spanish took over the region, they replaced crops like the tree tomato with European crops that only fruited once a year. By the time scientists realized how important year-round production was, industrial agriculture had already standardized around seasonal harvest. It wasn't until 1967 when New Zealand rebranded it as a tamarillo to make it sound more exotic. So it went from a tree that could feed people 12 times a year to a fruit that most of you are just now hearing about, which is pretty insane. Your entire food system collapsed in the next 24 hours. The first fruit trees grow.
Over 3 million American citizens in Puerto Rico are rationing water in 48-hour cycles and standing in line for hours just to fill jugs from tanker trucks right now. July was the driest month San Juan had seen in 120 years, and Trump has said not a word about it, which is especially infuriating because the conditions that made this possible were built on his watch. Puerto Rico's water infrastructure has been neglected for decades. Things like crumbling pipes and lack of maintenance mean 65% of what their water authority produces leaks before it even reaches the tap. Then, in 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated what was left, and the federal response to that was this. Congress eventually allocated $42.5 billion to Puerto Rico's recovery, and almost none of it reached the island in time to matter, with the Trump administration blocking and delaying funds for years. So the pipes were never fixed and crucial infrastructure was never rebuilt. Add in a historic drought, and every vulnerability within that system that was never repaired gets exposed to all at once. Meteorologists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had been warning about this drought for months before it hit. Yet the Trump administration has spent this term gutting the NOAA, cutting nearly 1,900 employees, proposing to slash its budget by 27%, and dismantling the federal climate monitoring.
This woman agreed to be a surrogate for a couple, but the fetus was diagnosed with a fatal fetal abnormality. Instead of respecting their wishes to she kidnapped it, went to Texas, and gave birth. Not before giving interviews with pro-life media outlets and claiming she's the mother, though. For starters, statistically, can a person survive with this condition? Yes. However, each case is very individual and can range in how severe or deadly it can be. Would they need multiple surgeries, lots of monitoring their entire life, up to and including a heart transplant, possibly even as a baby? Also, yes. So after talking with the doctors, what the parents, Omar Ahmed and Nasheen Gilkar, wanted was for the surrogate, McKenna West, to get the Instead, she refused, going AWOL with their embryo, and fled from Alaska to Texas. It appears she went to Texas to try to claim parentage since she's the one who gave birth to him. She's doing this with the help of anti-choice crusader Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's running for Senate in Texas. The parents have gotten a restraining order against West so that she can't make decisions for Rumi, the name his parents gave him, not Gabriel, as West and Paxton have called him. She also can't hold him. However, the judge also ruled that he must stay in Texas while the first of many surgeries he will likely need is performed, despite the parents wanting him to be at home with them in California. Worth noting, she thought that her brother would adopt the baby. At no point did she think she would be taking on the responsibility of this child with complex lifelong medical needs. For now, the parents are with Rumi, enjoying the time they have with him. This woman agreed.
Kim Jong-un has always treated me with great respect. I understand him, he understands me. Quiet. Very disrespectful in front of this young man. Okay? Don't you find her disrespectful? He understands. Quiet. Who are you with? Fake news. You're fake news. You're a loud, boisterous person. You're fake news. Be quiet. Be quiet. Quiet. You're a fake reporter, and you report fake news.
On the USS Lincoln.
Yeah, it is. That was CNN.